Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Zoom worship service on this beautiful snowy Sunday. I'm glad to see your faces today. We begin our service by acknowledging that the land on which our homes and our church were built was not uninhabited when European settlers arrived here with their ideas of conquest and ownership. For those of us who live in Moscow, Pullman, or other nearby communities, we live on the ancestral homelands of the Nimipu, called Nez Perce by the French-speaking traders, the Palouse, and the Shitshumsh, called the Coeur d'Alene. If you're joining us from another place, I encourage you to discover who inhabited or moved through the place where you now live in the times before colonization and genocide. Investigate too where they are now. So let's pause together and remember that we live on ground that is sacred, ground that was stolen, ground that cries out for justice and responsible stewardship. May our remembering help us find the courage to do our part to restore wholeness to the earth and all her peoples. And now I invite you to join voices for our words of welcome, our unison chalice lighting, and our sung affirmation. So say these words with me. Whoever you are, wherever you've come from, whatever your beliefs, whomever you love, and however bumpy your life's journey, know that you are welcome here. We're hoping that everyone has a chalice or a candle to light and something to light it with. Let's go ahead and light our chalices together.
Hello, I'm Ginger Yoder, and I am going to light our chalice this morning. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek and seek to share.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung in every land by every tongue.
Today's service is an unusual one. Rather than preparing a service or a homily or a sermon ahead of time, I'm just going to accept your questions and try to answer them on the fly. A few people sent questions ahead of time. I'll answer those first, and then I'll answer any questions that you've typed into the chat. And you can type them in at any point during the service. Ryan Uri is going to be collecting those for me and putting them in order and in a spot where I can access them when it's time. Now, you can ask me anything, although I retain the right not to answer. You can ask me something theological, something personal, something silly, whatever it is you're wondering about or would like to hear me wrestle with. And just, the reminder that whatever answers I come up with are mine, and they don't need to be yours. I think you can't get much beyond simple math without discovering a rich tapestry of complexity and shifting perspectives. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm that we don't need to think alike in order to love one another, which is to say, if you don't like my answer to your question or to one of the other questions, no worries. My deepest hope is that this service will invite you to do some wrestling of your own. And let's begin by joining together in singing Answering the Call of Love.
The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide, and so every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love, hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith we dare to proclaim. We are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love, hands joined together as hearts beat as one, emboldened by faith we dare to proclaim. We are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Beautiful. So I did extend the invitation for people to send in questions ahead of time. And there are 3 of them, so I'm going to answer those first, and then we'll have a time of meditation. And in the meantime, if you have other questions that come up, feel free to type them in the chat. The first question I'm going to attempt to answer came in from Mary Dupree, and it's actually a series of interrelated questions. Do we as Unitarian Universalists value religious pluralism? If so, what is our bottom line? Do we tolerate curiocracy and homophobia of doctrinal Mormons and ultra-Orthodox Jews? And should we accept them in our town? And if so, what in particular do we reject about Christ Church, other than the views on slavery of some or all of their leadership? Is it because they've expressed an ambition to take over our town? How is this different from the aggressive evangelism of other Christian religions? Oh boy, I think we've all wrestled with this one, at least those of us who live locally. So here's the paradox of tolerance. And the paradox of tolerance is that it states that if a society is tolerant without limit, its ability to be tolerant is eventually seized or destroyed by the intolerant. And so philosopher Karl Popper described it as the seemingly paradoxical idea that in order to maintain a tolerant society, the society must be intolerant of intolerance. So I would say that yes, we as Unitarian Universalists value religious pluralism, but our bottom line is that we don't tolerate intolerant behavior, right? And we don't tolerate harmful behavior. So if a church is, or if a person is believing, if a church is teaching that certain categories of people are lesser, then we have, I believe, a spiritual and moral obligation to stand in opposition to that church, or at least to those teachings. And you know, when you're talking about harm and preventing harm, what comes up for me are issues of boundaries, the importance of boundaries, and the importance of structures of accountability. I think to the extent we're capable, we should try to engage those differences. We should try to, pull people toward tolerance, toward love, to sort of show by example. So in our setting of boundaries and our holding of people accountable, we don't want to be that there's a place of being clear and firm that is not unkind or unloving, and I think that's the sweet spot. I think that's where I want to aim. When it comes to Christ Church, those of you who have been around for a good long while will remember that when I first came to town, I said that I was open to sitting down with Christ Church and trying to find some common ground, trying to find a place where we could work together. And I backed away from that. And I backed away from that as I learned more about not just the positions that Christ Church takes on slavery and LGBTQIA plus issues, and that sort of deliberate provocation, that deliberate cruelty, and driving of the culture wars, but also the treatment of the way they handled child sexual abuse. One of the boundaries that I set for myself is I refuse to be in relationship with people who treat people like things. And, sometimes that's a harder line to hold than others. Sherman Alexie's used to be one of my favorite writers, but then when I learned of a pattern of sexual harassment and assault, I had to put all of my books away. And you won't hear me reading his stuff. You won't hear me, because he treated women like things. So that's a boundary that I put in place to keep myself safe and also to protect the people that I care about. I don't want to expose them either. So let's see. Is it intolerant to ensure we don't spend money at businesses affiliated or owned by Christ Church? I think everybody's got to find their own their own way of negotiating that. I choose to draw the line at around behaviors and not beliefs or belonging, right? So if I know a church is owned by somebody who goes to Christ Church, if I know a business is owned by a Christ Church person, I won't necessarily stay away until and unless I hear that that business or that business owner has engaged in harmful behaviors. So that's where I draw the line. It's about behaviors. It's about causing harm. That's my bottom line. Let's see. Let's move on to the next question. This is from Marcus Smith. Given the past 4 years of political chaos, radical division, and ongoing climate crisis, all combined in the midst of a global pandemic of epic proportions, what lessons have we, as a relatively small local Unitarian Universalist church, learned about resilience, survival, and maintaining a vital, effective presence in our community? I feel like we've learned a lot. And some of the lessons have been expected, or sort of technical. Like we've learned how to do this, how to meet on Zoom, and how to navigate the technologies, how to connect in a variety of ways instead of relying so heavily on being able to gather in person. But more than that, I think the most important lesson that we've learned is what I see is that we as individuals and as a community, we've gotten more honest with each other. There's something about the challenges that have broken down that need to put on a good face, that need to present, oh, I'm competent, I'm in control. We've been able to say to each other, talk to one another about how hard these times are, how challenged we are. And what's emerged then is this beautiful network of, you know what, I don't always have to have my stuff together, because on the days when I don't, somebody else is going to come alongside and support me and help me get through. So there's a way that we've learned how to live interdependence and with more grace and generosity. And I think that's actually the most important lesson that we've learned. Chuck Harris, whose brother is in the last week of his life, asked me if I have any thoughts about the nature or experience of death in the midst of this deadly plague. So death is a part of life. I used to say to my dad, none of us get out of here alive. But the ways that we know how to cope with and integrate and respond to death, a lot of those ways aren't accessible to us during the pandemic. And so I think I'm expecting, I think there's a big backlog of grief related to the 4 million people, 4 million plus, or no, 400,000, sorry, I had added an extra zero. The 400,000 plus people who have died, and all of the people who have died of unrelated issues, but we're going to wait to have a memorial service until we can get together. We're going to wait to have a memorial service until we can do it in person. We can't bring each other, we can't be with each other, we can't be present with one another, which is what grief requires to be processed and integrated. So I think there's going to be a backlog. I think it's going to be, I'm expecting, I'm anticipating a time where we're going to feel awash. And my intention is to have this community be a life raft so that we get through that backlog of grief all together. A drop at a time. Sort of related, Karen Ward asks, what's the Unitarian Universalist doctrine on heaven and especially on hell? And of course, I need to start by saying that we don't have much in the way of doctrine. And that there aren't official teachings. That said, if you look back at history, the Unitarians taught salvation by character. So they taught that if you live a good life, then you earn your way into heaven. And the Universalists taught that a loving God would never damn us to hell. And so hell just didn't exist. I think where we are today, and it varies a little from person to person, but I think there's an embrace of the mystery, of the truth that nobody really knows what happens after we die, and also an embrace of a knowing that how we live our lives leaves a mark, leaves a legacy, leaves an imprint, and that our immortality lives there. How we treat one another, how we contribute to that collective process of evolution. That's the immortality that we can trust. I think beyond that, the question of a loving God, a loving all-powerful God, and this sort of core universalist belief that there is no hell, is, that's the foundation that our faith is built on. And it's not necessarily an easy or, jolly happy foundation, because it means that we have to remain in relationship with people who cause harm, who do evil things. I've always said that, the big challenge of universalism is you can't send an Adolf Hitler to hell. Somehow you have to hold on to an awareness and compassion for the humanity at the center of the people who are doing evil acts. And again, I go back to that separating the person or the beliefs from the behaviors, and that's useful for me. But I think it's one of those areas that we just have to keep stretching into and struggling with. It's not a place of easy answers. I will say, I've been beside people as they've died on multiple occasions, and the experience, my sense of what's happening, is that it's not traumatic. It's been peaceful. It's been easeful. It's sometimes traumatic for the people who are who are sitting. It's not easy to let go of somebody that we love and care about. But I don't have the sense that there's anything we need to be afraid of after we die. And even if there is, even if I'm wrong about that, because Lord knows I could be wrong about anything, I don't think it helps our quality of life to be afraid. I think our faith invites us to choose love over fear whenever possible. And so rather than fearing death, we choose to love life, we choose to love each other. And I don't know about you, I'm kind of curious. So I think I'm even going to try to love death and love dying, because then I find out what happens on the other side. So I will stop there. Those are the questions that came in early. Ryan is capturing your comments and questions and follow-up thoughts and putting them in and curating them for me. So I'll answer those after we have this time of meditation. So I invite you to take a few deep breaths and center down. All of the most interesting questions resist easy answers. Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? What happens after we die? How do we become the people we are meant to be? The questions are not simple or clear. There are no right or wrong answers. The best we can hope for is to come to working understandings that are SAN, somewhat adequate for now. We share these understandings with one another because our lives and our spirits are enriched by a diversity of perspectives and experiences. The stories we tell about life and death and meaning and love hold us better when they're woven together with the stories of other people. Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves like locked rooms, and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now." In the silence, or as you listen to the music, I invite you to contemplate the unsolved questions in your heart. What are the questions you're seeking to love, seeking to live into in this moment? Let's breathe together and allow these questions to rise to the surface of our awareness. And if you wish, you may continue to type them in the chat. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. All right. So I think I'm gonna keep going with the theme. We have a question from Megan Stanley. How should we interact with people who love us but have hateful beliefs? And here again, I come back to boundaries, right? We think about there's a difference between boundaries and barriers. Barriers are things that we might put in place to sort of keep some distance between ourselves and another person. Boundaries are limits that we put in place to keep ourselves and the other person safe. And the intent behind boundaries is connection. So if we can remember that healthy boundaries, Brene Brown says, the most compassionate people actually have the strongest boundaries. So as we work at getting better, I think the way to interact with people who love us but have hateful beliefs is to get really, really good at setting boundaries that keep ourselves safe. Now, how do we do that? For me, it's a very embodied experience. I'll think about the person and just sort of breathe into the discomfort that I have, and what would it take to be myself and loving and compassionate, but also safe in this relationship. And then, I would set those boundaries. And of course, holding boundaries is sometimes tricky because unhealthy people don't respond well. Unhealthy people often experience the setting of boundaries as a barrier, as rejection, as critique, and they get sucked into their shame response. So, it's a tricky dance. And I think it's a really essential one that we work on choreographing for ourselves and each other, because there's no way to, we want to strive for unconditional love and acceptance, but we have to balance that with our own need to be safe and healthy and autonomous. We need to be ourselves, which sort of leads into a question that Shane McFarland typed in. Is there a value to prioritizing the individual over the group, i.e. individual core identity versus race, ethnicity, capitalism and democracy versus socialism and communism? He writes, a healthy mixture of self and group seems appropriate, yet which one comes first can have big consequences. And then, does the answer change across the context of self, politics or state, church and faith? There's more, but I'm going to stop there for now. To say that I think this is a false, I think it's a false duality. In life, I see a number of different polarities, two seemingly opposite things that are true at the same time. And our job as humans is to live in that tension and to kind of find the sweet spot in between. So it's very true that, we can't love others if we're not loving ourselves, and that each of us needs to be doing the work of discerning and living authentically, discerning, our own identity, being who we are, being clear about who we are and offering that up to the world. And at the same time, we need to be in relationship and allow who we are to be impacted and tempered by those relationships and the stories and experiences that we're engaged in. So I think it's a both and certainly that's true in the context of self and the context of church and faith, that we need to balance the well-being of the whole and our own individual needs. And I think it's true in terms of politics and the state as well. We all have our own political beliefs, and there are reasons that we have those political beliefs. And those beliefs, for all that there's an attempt to convince us that, we're in one of two very polarized camps, I think the reality is that there's more of a spectrum, and it's complex and it's diverse, and it's one of those situations where the multiplicity of perspectives and experiences and ideas gives us a better sense of what's real and true and the best path forward than any one individual could get to. So, I think got to live in the questions, got to live in the tension too. So then Shane continues, in thinking about responsibility and rights and teaching our children or adolescents which should be the primary lens when considering a responsible search for meaning, crime, or health. So when we're talking about self and group, which do we prioritize? I think it's really important when we're thinking about rights to focus on people who have fewer rights than we do. So when it comes to our rights, these are my rights. Until everybody has the same rights I do, I'm gonna look in this direction, and you look in the other direction with regards to responsibilities, right? So what am I being called to do? How can I be a little bit more responsible? And lean into those responsibilities and understand that, because otherwise you're entitled, right? If I'm all about, well, I've got my rights, and I don't want to have any responsibility for the well-being of other people, that's not going to get us where we need to go. But if we focus on everybody deserves the same rights and we all have a responsibility to, I think the base responsibility is sort of don't hurt other people, and harm none. Like, the base responsibility that we have is to do our part to maintain the social fabric. And so I hope that answers that question, Shane. I'm going to go up. We've got some sort of personal questions. Michael Irvin asks, what along your life's journey inspired you to become a UU minister? I grew up in a UU church. My parents joined a UU fellowship. They were charter members of a UU fellowship when I was like 5, 6, somewhere in there. And what I experienced in my UU fellowship growing up was really different than what life felt like anyplace else, certainly in my family, in school, out in society. At church, I was loved. I was held accountable. You have to behave in ways that don't harm other people. But, there was this acceptance of who I was, and people saw and celebrated the goodness in me. And I actually attribute a lot of certainly my values and strength and resilience. A lot of that came from my church community, and so I think that was part of what inspired me to want to give back. I know that this faith makes a difference in people's lives and helps us be more human, helps us be more kind, because that's what it did for me. Krista Kramer asks, thinking back to my childhood, what story sticks in my mind as most shaping my view of spirituality? It's the blind men and the elephant is what pops into mind. I think we probably did that in my religious education class 5 or 6 times over the years. This, no one person is going to have the right answer, but somehow if we're all coming at these questions from different directions, and if we bring our experiences and wisdom together, we get a better sense of the whole. Let's see. Marissa Gibler says, do I ever watch or listen to the services that happen when I have a day off, whether in real time or a recording? I watch the recording about half the time. I rarely listen. Almost every Sunday that I have off, I'm in the woods. If spirituality is sort of the individual practice of learning and growing and getting in touch with the inner the still small voice inside. You know, my spirituality is out in the Church of the Big Blue Dome. The value of religious community for me is that it brings that spirituality into relationship, into community. I think we need each other for that multiplicity of perspectives, and for checks and balances, and for accountability. So I do listen sometimes, about half the time, but it's important for me to nurture that my spiritual side, and the practice of Sabbath, of taking time off, of taking time to go be on my own, is really central to keeping my wellspring full, so that I have something to give to others. So, what's one of my happiest memories of an in-person UUCP event? You know, I love the way everybody dances. I love the way, I love the way the grown-ups and the kids and, everybody just dances. And that, maybe that's a dance with the senders, or maybe it's just in church. I mean, when I look out, like when there's, sometimes even during the hymns, like everybody's moving, and there's just this joy and love rising, and to the point where it's tangible, and that's what I miss. That's what I miss. Okay, so I have a couple questions about God. Do you believe God exists? From Jim Kenyon. And then from Karen Barron, am I a theist, agnostic, or atheist? She says she's just curious, and it won't affect her commitment to the church or to me. So my answer to these questions is it depends on the day. One of the great things about being a Unitarian Universalist is that you can flow. So there can be times when, yes, I believe there's a God, and times when I really don't, and that has intellectual and spiritual integrity in our tradition, because that's who and how we are. There's a way that the three stances, theist, agnostic, and atheist, are important correctives to each other, I think. The atheism helps inform theism by being clear about what God isn't. Agnosticism informs atheism and theism by reminding us that there's a mystery, and we can't ever really know. And the agnosticism left on its own, without that tension of is there or isn't there, can lead to nihilism. So I think it's good to have those 3 points of the triangle, and to have some mobility in between them, so that we don't get calcified in any one stand. When I believe in God, in those times when I believe in God, it's usually related to an experience of feeling held, of feeling led. So less an intellectual thinking, and more an experiential sense that maybe there's something that's luring us all toward greater love, toward greater wholeness in this process of collective evolution. When I am in that agnostic stance, which is always sort of in the background, it's about it embraces humility. It invites me to embrace humility, and reminds me that I don't actually know a whole lot about much of anything. And when I'm in that atheist place, the atheists are some of the most ethical people that I know. We're going to be good for no reason, right? I think is the slogan that I've seen on billboards. If there's no God, then we're just going to do this work of being human because it's the right thing to do. And I think there's a strength and a resilience in that I really value. And always, I think the question is, when we're talking about our beliefs, I've said this before and I'll say it over and over again, you know, we choose beliefs not because they're verifiable when it comes to spiritual issues. We choose our beliefs not because they're verifiable, but because they're helpful. So, you know, what are the helpful beliefs in this moment, in this situation? So maybe I'm pragmatic. Okay, let's see. We have a question from Janice Willard, who worries about the regular members who she hasn't seen coming to Zoom services. Are they okay? Are they having technology issues? Have they fallen away from our community and concern because they don't come to these gatherings? So what I want to say is, what I want is that we've been working really, really hard. And one of the realities about pandemic ministry is that where it used to be, we had this one primary way of connecting where we all gathered in the same place on Sundays. Now there's like this multiplicity of ways that we have to weave community. The lay pastoral ministers are working really hard. We have small groups. We have regular check-ins. We're going for walks. The truth of it is that there are people for whom this virtual format is really wonderful, and there are people for whom this virtual format just does not and will not work. And so we've had to get creative and find other ways to stay connected. So I would say if you're worried about individual people, I'd encourage all of you to reach out, because you know, we're doing the best we can. The lay pastoral ministers are doing the best they can. The staff is doing the best we can. And there are a lot of people, and the more connections, the better, right? So I don't think anybody's ever going to be offended by getting a phone call. Hey, I haven't seen you in church for a while. How are you doing? So those kinds of connections are definitely welcomed and encouraged. And I don't think we've lost hold of anybody, with the possible exception of some of the people who are losing hold of life. We have some people who are coming to the end, who are, that's the most heartbreaking part, are the people who are in skilled nursing at this point, and having cognitive issues and can't manage the technology and can't really hear on the phone. And we're still trying. We still try. But I went to see Jean Holly before she died this past summer, and between the masks and the glass partition, and I mean, I think she was able to hear that I loved her, but we weren't able to have a real conversation, and it's just hard. We're doing the best we can. Thank you for worrying, and everybody should feel empowered and encouraged to reach out whenever and however you can. So nobody gets left behind. Let's see. With Ryan Yuri asks, with a world so full of needs, how do we decide where to spend our all too limited time and energy? How can we know what is worth giving our lives to? Oh boy, that's a good one. That's a good one. Really the only thing I can share is my personal practice. And this is one of those practices where I find it useful to believe in God, in something wiser and bigger than me, pulling me forward. And that still small voice isn't just my own intuition, but something deeper and more powerful. And I just breathe into it and listen. Just breathe into it and listen, and recognize that the answers that come from that centered place aren't, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. The answers are, this is what I'm going to do today, or sometimes this is what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes. This is what I'm going to do in the next breath. And the life journey, it's not. I don't experience my life journey as some grand adventure to reach a particular location that I'm aware of. I experience my life journey as, you know, a step, one small movement at a time, one small, one small next best choice. This is the next best choice. This is the next most important thing. And it's only when I get sort of, when I look back in hindsight, that it becomes clear the trajectory and the direction that I'm moving in. So there's that question. All right. Did we miss it? Did I miss any? How'd I do? Let's see, there's some in the... Okay. All right, it looks like there's some answers, some other answers to the questions, which is always welcome. And as we head into our coffee hour, I wanted to say too, you're welcome to wrestle with these questions yourselves in the coffee hour. And any of you who have other questions or have follow-up questions or who want to hear more from me are welcome to stay in the main group. So when you're invited to go into your breakout room, just say not right now, and I'll stick around in the main room for anyone who wants to chat with me directly. So let me read again that Rilke quote that we had as part of our meditation. Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms, like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. And this time I'm going to give you the last sentence of this particular passage. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So be it, and so may it be. We're going to sing together again, just as long. This is in the gray hymnal. I'm pretty sure it's number 6.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I made my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life. Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did best, tell them I said yes to love.
Our closing reading is a poem called A Gift by Denise Levertov. Just when you seem to yourself nothing but a flimsy web of questions, you are given the questions of others to hold in the emptiness of your hands, songbird eggs that can still hatch if you keep them warm, butterflies opening and closing themselves in your cupped palms, trusting you not to injure their scintillant fur, their dust. You are given the questions of others as if they were answers to all you ask. Yes, perhaps this gift is your answer. I'm Benedict. I invite you to say with me now the words to embody our separate chalice flames. We extinguish these chalices that they might glow gently in our hearts. May they light our paths as we leave this place. May they guide our way until we are together again. Beloveds, all of these questions, there are no right answers, there are no sure answers, but we ask them because the asking is what helps us be the people that we're meant to be the people that the world needs us to be. And always ask them of yourselves and of one another, knowing that you're held in that love that abides, that has no end. I love you. I miss you. Amen. And blessed be. Go in peace.